You think that badge is a shield? Son, for Sergeant Vance Harlan it was a weapon. He ruled the 12th precinct like a warlord, convinced his uniform made him untouchable. But on a rainy night that smelled of stale coffee and arrogance, Vance made a mistake that would cost him everything. He didn't just profile the man standing in the lobby. He brutalized him. He slammed a stranger's face into the concrete, laughing as the blood pooled. He didn't know that the man he had in handcuffs wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a criminal. He was Quentin Blackwood, the man sent by the governor to burn Vance's corrupt kingdom to the ground. Watch closely, because what happens when the predator realizes he's actually the prey isn't justice. It's a massacre. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. That was the philosophy of Sergeant Vance Harlan, a man whose reputation in the 12th precinct hung somewhere between folk hero and looming threat. Vance was a big man built like a vending machine, with a mustache that hadn't been in style since the 80s. He sat at the front desk, boots up on the counter, picking his teeth with a laminated business card. The station was quiet, save for the hum of the vending machine and the rhythmic thud of a leaking ceiling tile into a plastic bucket near the entrance. "Quiet night, Sarge," Officer Lena Slater ventured. She was fresh out of the academy, still had creases in her uniform, and still believed in the motto written on the side of the cruisers. She was terrified of Vance. "Quiet is bad, Slater," Vance grunted, not looking up from the sports section of a day-old paper. "Quiet means the cockroaches are breeding. I prefer it loud. Loud means we're catching them." The double doors at the front of the precinct swung open, bringing a gust of cold, wet wind and the smell of ozone into the sterile lobby. A man walked in. He was tall, wearing a soaked charcoal trench coat that had seen better days, a beanie pulled low over his ears, and heavy work boots that squeaked on the linoleum. He was black, his skin dark and glistening with rain, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He didn't look like a lawyer. He didn't look like a cop. To Vance's cynical eyes, he looked like a problem. The man shook off the water like a wet dog, spraying droplets onto the precinct floor. He approached the high desk, his demeanor calm, perhaps too calm for Vance's liking. "Help you?" Vance asked, dropping the paper. He didn't sit up. He didn't take his boots off the desk. "I hope so," the man said. His voice was a deep baritone, steady and devoid of the usual nervousness civilians showed when entering the lion's den. "I'm looking for the watch commander. I believe his name is Lieutenant Knox." Vance let out a short, sharp laugh. "Lieutenant Knox is at home sleeping in a bed that costs more than your life. Who's asking?" "I have an appointment," the man said. He reached into his coat pocket. Vance's hand dropped instinctively to the retention strap of his Glock 19. "Hands. Keep them where I can see them." The man paused, slowly withdrawing his hand to reveal a damp, folded piece of paper. "It's just a letter, Sergeant. No need for the theatrics." Vance narrowed his eyes. He hated being corrected. He hated it even more coming from someone who looked like he should be sweeping the floors, not asking for the boss. He swung his legs down, the heavy thud of his boots echoing like a gavel. "Let me see that," Vance snapped, snatching the paper from the man's hand. He didn't read it. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the trash can behind him without breaking eye contact. "Looks like you don't have an appointment anymore." Officer Slater shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Sarge, maybe we should just call—" "Shut it, Slater," Vance hissed. He turned his attention back to the stranger. "We don't do walk-ins for the lieutenant. You got a complaint? Write it on a form. You want a warm place to sleep? Try the shelter 3 blocks down. Now beat it." The man didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, his eyes scanning Vance's name tag, then his face, memorizing the geography of his arrogance. I'm not leaving until I speak to the person in charge of this shift. Vance stood up. He was 6'4", a tower of intimidation tactics honed over years of bad policing. He walked around the desk, the jingle of his keys and handcuffs sounding like a warning bell. "You aren't hearing me, boy," Vance said, his voice dropping to that dangerous low register he used right before things got physical. "I am in charge, and I'm telling you to get the hell out of my lobby before I find a reason to book you." "On what grounds?" the man asked. He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. "Trespassing," Vance said, stepping into the man's personal space. "Loitering, resisting an officer, disorderly conduct. Pick one. I got a menu." "I haven't broken any laws, Sergeant Harlan," the man said. "I am a citizen in a public building requesting a meeting." "You're a nuisance," Vance spat, poking a thick finger into the man's chest. "And you're dirtying my floor." The stranger looked down at where Vance's finger prodded his wet coat. He looked back up, his eyes hardening. "Touch me again, Sergeant, and you will regret it." The air in the room vanished. Slater stood up, her hand hovering over her radio. "Sarge, don't." Vance's face turned a mottled shade of crimson. He wasn't used to pushback, he was used to fear. And this lack of fear felt like an insult. It felt like a challenge. "Is that a threat?" Vance shouted, his voice booming off the walls. "Did you just threaten a police officer?" "It was a warning," the man said calmly. "That's it." Vance lunged. He didn't go for a standard arrest hold, he went for a takedown. He grabbed the lapels of the man's trench coat and swept his leg. The man, caught off guard by the sudden violence, hit the floor hard. His head cracked against the linoleum with a sickening thud. "Stop resisting!" Vance screamed, a rehearsed line for the cameras he knew weren't recording in the lobby because he had disabled them recently. "Stop fighting me!" The man wasn't fighting. He was dazed, trying to push himself up, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. "You are making a mistake," he groaned. "The only mistake was you walking in here," Vance grunted. He dropped his knee onto the man's neck, a move explicitly banned by the department years prior. He ground his weight down, pinning the man to the dirty floor. "Sarge, stop! He's not fighting," Slater screamed, coming around the desk. "Back off, rookie," Vance roared, his face contorted in a mask of adrenaline and hate. "Get the cuffs now." Slater froze. She looked at the man on the floor, his eyes rolling back slightly, blood mixing with the rainwater. She looked at her superior officer, a man she was trained to obey. Fear won. She unclipped her cuffs and handed them over. Vance snatched them, wrenched the man's arms behind his back with a force that popped the man's shoulder socket and ratcheted the steel bracelets tight, too tight. "Get him up," Vance panted, hauling the man to his feet by the handcuffs. The stranger let out a sharp gasp of pain but remained silent. Vance shoved him toward the holding area, the heavy steel door buzzing open. "Welcome to the 12th, pal. Hope you like the hospitality." The stranger, blood running down into his eye, looked back at Vance. There was no fear in his gaze, only a cold, terrifying promise. "You have no idea who I am," the stranger whispered. "I don't care who you are," Vance sneered, shoving him into the booking cage. "To me, you're just another stat." The holding cell at the 12th precinct was a sensory nightmare. It smelled of bleach, vomit, and despair. Vance shoved the man onto the metal bench, sending a jolt of pain through the stranger's dislocated shoulder. "Empty your pockets," Vance barked, tossing a plastic bin onto the bench. The man, whose hands were still cuffed behind his back, looked at Vance pointedly. "You'll have to uncuff me, Sergeant." Vance laughed, a cruel, wet sound. "Not a chance. I'll do it." Vance plunged his hands into the man's coat pockets, treating him like a sack of laundry. He pulled out a wallet, a set of keys, and a cheap burner phone. He tossed them into the bin. Let's see who we got here, Vance muttered, flipping open the wallet. He expected to find a suspended license, maybe a few crumpled singles. Instead, he found a sleek black leather card holder. Inside was a single credit card, a black Amex Centurion, and a driver's license. Vance squinted at the license. Quentin Blackwood, Washington, D.C. He looked up, unimpressed. Long way from home, Blackwood. What are you, a drug dealer? A pimp? Nobody carries a black card unless they're dirty. Quentin sat up straighter, wincing as his shoulder throbbed. I work for the state sanitation, Vance joked, looking back at Officer Slater for validation. Slater didn't smile. She was standing by the door, clutching her clipboard, looking pale. Something like that, Quentin said. I take out the trash. Vance slammed the wallet shut. Smart mouth. I'm going to add obstruction to your sheet. Maybe I'll lose your paperwork for a few hours, let you marinate in here with the drunks. Vance turned to Slater. Book him. John Doe. No prints yet. Let him sit. Sarge, Slater whispered, stepping closer. That wallet. The badge cut out. There's an indentation. He carries a badge. Vance paused. He looked at the wallet again. Slater was right. The leather was molded in the shape of a shield. He felt a flicker of hesitation, but he squashed it immediately. If this guy was a cop, he would have led with that. Probably a security guard, Vance dismissed. Or a fake. You know how these guys are. They buy a 10-star online and think they own the city. He tossed the wallet into the evidence locker and slammed it shut. I need a medical evaluation, Quentin said calmly. My shoulder is dislocated, and I have a laceration on my forehead that requires sutures. Medical's busy, Vance lied. You'll see a nurse when I feel like calling one. Vance walked up to the bars, gripping them with his meaty hands. You listen to me, Blackwood. You're in my house now. You stay quiet. You survive. You make noise, and things get a lot worse. Understand? Quentin wiped the blood from his eye with his shoulder. I understand perfectly, Sergeant. I understand that you have violated at least 7 departmental policies in the last few minutes. Excessive force, failure to identify, denial of medical attention, unlawful detention, falsifying evidence. Vance's eyes went wide. You a lawyer? No, Quentin said. I'm the guy who fires the lawyers. Vance snorted, turning his back. Whatever. Slater, watch him. If he moves, tase him. Vance stormed out of the booking area, heading for the break room to grab a donut and brag to the other guys about the perp he just took down. Slater stood alone in the booking room with Quentin. The silence stretched heavy and uncomfortable. Officer Slater, Quentin said gently. She jumped. I can't talk to you, she said. You're new, Quentin observed. I can tell by the way you hold your belt. It's heavy, isn't it? The weight of it. Slater looked at him under the blood and the grime. He had a face that commanded respect. It wasn't the face of a criminal. You knew what he was doing was wrong, Quentin said. I saw it in your eyes. He's my superior, Slater whispered, glancing at the door. If I go against him, my career is over before it starts. Is it? Quentin asked. Tell me, officer, who signs your paychecks, Sergeant Harlan or the city of Seattle? The city, she said. And who appoints the leadership of this precinct? The chief of police? She recited automatically. Quentin nodded slowly. And do you know who the new chief is? The one the mayor flew in from D.C. last week. The one nobody has seen yet because he wanted to do a field audit incognito. Slater's blood ran cold. She stared at Quentin. She looked at the expensive boots, the calm demeanor, the knowledge of procedure. No, she breathed. My name, he said, his voice hard as iron, is Quentin Blackwood, formerly deputy director of the FBI. Currently, your new chief of police. Slater dropped her clipboard. It clattered loudly on the floor. And I have a phone call to make. Officer Slater, if you want to save your career, I suggest you get that phone out of the evidence bin and hand it to me right now. Slater trembled. She looked at the door where Vance had exited. She looked at the man bleeding on the bench. It was a choice between a bully she knew and a legend she feared. She made her choice. She fumbled for the keys to the evidence locker. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped them twice. She unlocked the bin, grabbed the cheap burner phone, and slid it through the bars. Quentin took it with his cuffed hands. "Thank you, officer. You just became the first good cop I've met in this city." He dialed a number. He didn't look at the keypad. He put the phone to his ear. "This is Blackwood," he said into the receiver. "Code Red, 12th Precinct. Bring the cavalry and tell Internal Affairs to wake up Captain Mitchell. I have a big one for him." He hung up and looked at Slater. A small, grim smile played on his lips. "You might want to step outside, Officer Slater. The weather is about to change." Sergeant Vance Harlan wiped powdered sugar from his thick mustache onto the sleeve of his uniform. He was holding court in the break room, a cramped space that smelled of burnt popcorn and cynicism. Two other officers, Kane and Brooks, cronies who had ridden Vance's coattails for years, were chuckling at his retelling of the lobby incident. "So I tell the guy," Vance boomed, gesturing with a half-eaten donut. "I say, 'You're dirtying my floor.' And this mope, this absolute nobody," he puffs up his chest like he's Denzel Washington and says, "Touch me again and you'll regret it." Kane snorted. "Seriously, what a fool, right?" Vance grinned, his eyes devoid of warmth. So I introduced his face to the linoleum. Had to remind him about gravity. He's cooling his heels in cage 2 now. Probably crying for a lawyer. I think I'll let him sit there until shift change. Let the day shift deal with the paperwork. He felt good. He felt powerful. This was his precinct, his little kingdom carved out in the rain-slicked streets of Seattle. He decided it was time to go back and mess with the prisoner a little more. Maybe tighten those cuffs a notch. Vance swaggered back out into the hallway, past the bulletin boards plastered with outdated wanted posters. He stepped into the booking area, expecting to find a cowed prisoner and a compliant rookie. What he found was an atmosphere thick with terror. Officer Slater was standing by the evidence locker, her back pressed against the metal cabinets, shaking violently. She stared at Vance like he was a ghost, or perhaps a walking corpse. And the prisoner, Quentin Blackwood, was no longer sitting on the bench. He was standing at the bars, his posture ramrod straight despite the cuffed hands behind his back and the drying blood on his face. His eyes tracked Vance's entrance with the predatory focus of a panther waiting in high grass. "What's wrong with you, Slater?" Vance barked, irritated by the vibe. "You look like you've seen a werewolf. I told you to watch him, not wet yourself." Slater couldn't speak. She just pointed a trembling finger toward the front of the station. That's when Vance heard it. It started as a low hum, barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. But within seconds, it swelled into a cacophony that vibrated through the soles of Vance's boots. Sirens. Not one or two, dozens. Their wails overlapped, creating a frantic, dissonant symphony that drew nearer with impossible speed. Then came the lights. The high windows at the front of the booking area, usually dark squares reflecting the grim interior, suddenly erupted in brilliant flashes of red and blue. It was intense, blinding, rhythmic strobe lighting that washed over the walls, casting manic shadows. "What the hell is going on out there?" Vance muttered. He walked past the holding cells, ignoring Blackwood's steely gaze, and pushed through the double doors into the main lobby. He stopped dead. Through the glass front doors of the 12th Precinct, Vance saw a scene that made no sense. The street outside, usually deserted at this hour save for a passing taxi, was a parking lot of law enforcement vehicles. There were Seattle PD cruisers, yes, but they were outnumbered. There were dark SUVs with tinted windows, federal issue. There were the distinct blue and gold marked cars of the Washington State Patrol, and ominously, two large unmarked black tactical vans sat idling at the curb, heavily armed men in full SWAT gear pouring out of the back doors. It looked like a presidential motorcade had collided with a counterterrorism operation right on his doorstep. The phone at the front desk began to ring. It was an angry, insistent trill. Vance ignored it. "Slater," Vance yelled, his voice cracking slightly. "Did you call a 1013? Officer down. What is this circus?" Slater stumbled into the lobby behind him, clutching the door frame for support. I didn't call him, Sergeant." "Then who did?" Vance demanded, spinning around. The front doors burst open with such force they banged against the interior walls. Leading the charge wasn't a beat cop. It was Captain Garrett Mitchell of Internal Affairs, a man known throughout the department as the Grim Reaper. Mitchell was lean, sharp-featured, and wore suits that cost more than Vance's car. He hated dirty cops with a religious fervor. Behind Mitchell came 4 state troopers, giants in immaculate uniforms and campaign hats, their hands resting on their holsters. And flanked by them was a woman in a severe gray power suit carrying a leather briefcase, Assistant District Attorney Nora Reed, the toughest prosecutor in the county. The lobby was instantly full of armed, serious people who were definitely not there for a social call. The air crackled with static and hostility. Vance, running on years of unearned confidence, decided to bulldoze his way through. He puffed out his chest, trying to physically occupy the space. "Captain Mitchell?" Vance said, adopting a tone of annoyed superiority. "Little late for a surprise inspection, isn't it? And you brought the state boys. What, did someone jaywalk on the I-5? Captain Mitchell didn't even slow down. He walked straight up to Vance, stopping inches from his face. Mitchell smelled of expensive cologne and cold fury. "Sergeant Harlan," Mitchell said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "Excuse me?" Vance bristled. "This is my watch, Captain. You don't come busting into my lobby with a platoon of statties without a damn good reason. I got protocols here." "Your protocols just expired," Mitchell spat. He turned to the state troopers. "Secure the exits. Nobody in or out. Shut down the camera system hard drives. I want everything preserved." "Hey!" Vance shouted, putting a hand on Mitchell's chest to stop him. "You can't just barge in here. I have a dangerous prisoner in custody back there." Mitchell looked down at Vance's hand on his chest as if it were a piece of dog filth. "Remove your hand, Sergeant, before Trooper Brooks removes it at the wrist." The largest of the state troopers stepped forward, his hand dropping to his sidearm. Vance snatched his hand back, his face flushing purple. "You're making a mistake, Mitchell," Vance snarled, trying to regain control of the narrative. "We got a guy in the back. Came in here aggressive, threatening officers. I had to put him down. He's a transient, probably high on something. He's got no ID, wouldn't cooperate." "Shut your mouth," Mitchell interrupted. "Every word you say is just another nail in your coffin, Harlan." Mitchell turned to ADA Reed. "Nora, you have the warrant signed by Judge Watkins minutes ago," Reed said, holding up a piece of paper. "Search and seizure for the entire premises and an arrest warrant." Vance blinked. "Arrest warrant for who? The bum in the back?" Mitchell finally smiled. It was a terrifying sight. "No, you idiot. For you." Before Vance could process this, Mitchell pushed past him, heading straight for the booking area double doors. The entourage followed, leaving Vance standing alone in the middle of his own lobby, surrounded by state troopers who were looking at him like he was something stuck to the bottom of a boot. Confused, angry, and starting to feel the first cold tendrils of genuine fear, Vance chased after them. "You can't go back there," Vance yelled, bursting through the doors into the booking area. "That's a secure zone." The scene inside stopped him cold. Officer Slater was in a corner, crying silently. Captain Mitchell was standing in front of holding cell 2. "Open it," Mitchell commanded. Slater fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before finally managing to unlock the cell door. It swung open with a screech. Quentin Blackwood stepped out. He was still handcuffed. Blood still dried on his forehead. His coat was filthy. But the dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The energy didn't flow from Vance anymore. It flowed from the man in handcuffs. Vance pointed an accusing finger at Blackwood. "See, that's him. Resisting arrest, assaulting a police officer. John Doe, his name." Captain Mitchell cut in, his voice echoing off the cinderblock walls. "His name is not John Doe." Mitchell turned to Blackwood. His demeanor changed instantly from aggression to deference. "Sir," Mitchell said, nodding respectfully to the prisoner. "My apologies for the delay. The traffic on the bridge was hell." Vance's jaw dropped. "Sir?" The head of Internal Affairs had just called a handcuffed transient, "Sir." Quentin Blackwood looked at Mitchell. "The delay, Captain. We're going to have to work on our response times." His voice was calm, authoritative, the voice of a man used to being obeyed without question. "Yes, sir. Understood," Mitchell said contritely. Blackwood turned slowly, pivoting on his heel until he was facing Sergeant Vance Harlan. Vance looked at the man. Really looked at him this time. He saw past the dirt and the blood. He saw the intelligence in the eyes, the rigid posture of command. "You," Vance stammered, his brain trying to misfire, trying to reject the impossible reality that was dawning on him. "Who are you?" Quentin Blackwood took a step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You asked me that earlier, Sergeant. You asked if I was a drug dealer. A pimp?" Blackwood paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. "And then you threw my ID in a locker without looking at it." Blackwood turned his back on Vance, presenting his cuffed hands to Captain Mitchell. "Captain, if you do the honors, these things are cutting off my circulation." "Of course, Chief," Mitchell said. He pulled out a key and unlocked the cuffs. The ratcheting sound as they loosened seemed deafening in the quiet room. Blackwood rubbed his wrists, wincing slightly as the blood rushed back into his hands. Then he slowly reached into the inside pocket of his dirty trench coat. Vance flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, Blackwood pulled out a leather wallet. It wasn't the one Vance had confiscated. It was a different one. He flipped it open. The gold shield inside caught the overhead fluorescent lights, glittering brilliantly. Below the shield was an ID card with Blackwood's photo and his title in bold blue letters. Vance squinted. He read the words. Then he read them again. "Chief of Police, Seattle Police Department." Vance's face didn't just go pale. It went gray. The blood drained from his head so fast he felt dizzy. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grab the booking counter to stay upright. The vending machine hummed. The ceiling tile dripped water into the bucket. Thud. 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 "Sergeant Harlan," Chief Quentin Blackwood said, his voice low and terrible. "I believe you're sitting at my desk." The silence in the 12th precinct was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. A vacuum where the world holds its breath to see who is left standing. Sergeant Vance Harlan stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the booking counter so hard his knuckles turned white. His brain was frantically trying to rewrite the last few minutes, desperately searching for a loop, a technicality, a way out of the nightmare unfolding before him. "Chief," Vance croaked, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. You're the new chief, but the memo said you weren't due until next week." Quentin Blackwood, now uncuffed and rubbing his wrists, didn't even look at him. He turned to Captain Mitchell. "Captain, I want a full medical team here for the staff and get a crime scene unit to process the lobby. There's blood on the floor. My blood. Yes, sir, Mitchell replied, tapping away on his phone. Vance took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture, a stark contrast to the aggressive posture he'd held just moments ago. Sir, please listen to me. You came in dressed like a transient. I didn't know who you were. If I had known. Blackwood spun around. The movement was so sharp, so precise that Vance flinched. If you had known, Blackwood interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a razor. You would have treated me with respect. Is that it, Sergeant? Yes, exactly. Vance nodded enthusiastically, thinking he saw a lifeline. It was a misunderstanding. I treat my superiors with the utmost respect. I'm old school, sir. Blackwood stepped closer, invading Vance's personal space just as Vance had done to him. The chief's face was inches from the sergeant's. Vance could see the cut above Blackwood's eye, still weeping red, a vivid testament to Vance's brutality. That is exactly the problem, Harlan, Blackwood said softly. You treat your superiors with respect. But how do you treat the people who pay your salary? How do you treat the weak, the poor, the ones who come into this station looking for help? Vance swallowed hard. We have to be tough, sir. This is a tough neighborhood. You aren't tough, Blackwood said, his eyes boring into Vance's soul. You're a bully with a badge, and you just assaulted a citizen. The fact that the citizen happened to be your commanding officer is just the icing on the cake. It changes nothing about the crime. Blackwood turned to the state troopers standing like statues by the door. Trooper Brooks, Blackwood commanded, relieve Sergeant Harlan of his duty weapon. Vance's eyes went wide. Now hold on, you can't just... Blackwood barked, do it. Trooper Brooks moved with terrifying efficiency. He stepped forward, grabbed Vance's arm, and in one fluid motion unlatched the retention strap and pulled the Glock 19 from Vance's holster. He cleared the chamber, the unspent round clattering onto the floor with a metallic ping, and handed the weapon to Captain Mitchell. His badge, Blackwood said. Vance instinctively covered his chest with his hand. The badge was his identity. It was his power. Without it, he was just a middle-aged man with a bad temper and a mortgage he couldn't afford. Sir, please, Vance begged, his voice cracking. I've got years on the force. I've got a pension. Don't do this. You should have thought about your pension before you slammed my face into the floor, Blackwood said coldly. Give it to him. Vance's hands shook as he unpinned the shield. His fingers felt numb. He handed the piece of metal to the trooper, feeling a piece of himself die as it left his possession. Now, Blackwood said, pointing to the holding cell he had just vacated, put him in the cage too. What? Vance gasped. You can't put me in the cage. I'm a cop. You can't put a cop in general population holding. You're not a cop right now, Mr. Harlan, Blackwood said. Right now you are a suspect in a felony assault investigation, and until you are processed, you stay in holding just like everyone else. Trooper Brooks spun Vance around. Vance tried to resist, his old instincts kicking in. But the trooper was younger, stronger, and trained for this. He slammed Vance against the booking counter, the exact same spot where Vance had brutalized Blackwood earlier. Hands behind your back, Brooks ordered. Vance felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting around his wrists. The sound was sickeningly familiar, but the sensation was alien. It was tight. It pinched. It hurt. Too tight. Vance yelped. You got him too tight. Blackwood watched, his expression unreadable. Strange, he murmured. I seem to recall you telling me that comfort wasn't a priority in the 12th precinct. Vance was marched across the room. He looked around desperately for allies. He saw Officers Kane and Brooks peeking out from the break room, their faces pale. Kane, help me, Vance shouted. Call the union rep. Call somebody. Kane quickly looked away and closed the break room door. The message was clear. "You're on your own, Vance." Vance was shoved into the cell. The heavy steel door clanged shut, the sound echoing like a tomb closing. He gripped the bars, looking out at the station he had ruled like a king just minutes ago. Now he was looking at it through a cage. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on his chest. But worse than the humiliation was the realization that the man standing outside, the man wiping blood from his forehead with a handkerchief, held Vance's entire life in his hands. And Vance knew with a sinking dread that mercy was not on the agenda. The 12th precinct transformed from a police station into a crime scene. Chief Blackwood refused to leave for the hospital. He sat in the main lobby on a plastic chair, a paramedic tending to the gash on his forehead while he directed the operation. The visual was striking. The new chief, battered and bruised, sitting amidst the chaos, issuing orders with calm precision, while his predecessor rattled the bars of a cell 10 feet away. "Captain Mitchell," Blackwood said as the medic applied a butterfly bandage to his brow. "I want Harlan's office turned upside down. If there's a loose floorboard, pry it up. If there's a locked drawer, drill it. I want to know everything this man has been doing for the last decade." "Already on it, Chief," Mitchell said. "We brought the K9 unit for narcotics and cash detection." Vance, watching from his cell, felt his stomach drop. The safe. He had a floor safe under the filing cabinet in his office. It wasn't standard issue. He'd installed it himself years ago to hold the proceeds from the local protection rackets he ran. "You won't find anything," Vance yelled from the cell, trying to sound confident but failing miserably. "I run a clean ship. This is a witch hunt." Blackwood ignored him. He turned to Officer Slater, who was still standing by the evidence locker, looking like she wanted to disappear. "Officer Slater?" Blackwood said gently. She jumped. "Yes, sir, Chief." "Relax, Slater," Blackwood said. "You did the right thing today. You stood up. That's not easy." "I should have done more," she whispered, looking at the floor. "I should have stopped him before he hit you." "You're a rookie against a veteran sergeant," Blackwood said. "The power dynamic was against you, but when it counted, you made the call. That matters." He paused. "Now I need you to be honest with me. What else goes on here? Does Harlan have a secondary storage location? A locker? A car?" Slater hesitated. She looked at Vance in the cell. Vance glared at her, mouthing the word rat. She took a deep breath. She looked at the chief. He keeps a set of keys in his bottom desk drawer. There's a storage unit down at the docks. He says it's for fishing gear, but he goes there during shift sometimes." "You traitor!" Vance screamed, rattling the bars. "I'll have your badge for this, Slater. You're finished." "Silence," Captain Mitchell roared, stepping toward the cell. "One more word out of you, Harlan, and I'll add witness intimidation to your charge sheet. Do you want to go for a life sentence?" Vance clamped his mouth shut, seething. "Excellent work, Slater," Blackwood said. He nodded to Mitchell. "Get a warrant for that storage unit immediately." For the next hour, Vance had to watch the systematic dismantling of his empire. He watched as internal affairs agents carried boxes of files out of his office. He watched as a tech guy cracked his computer password and started downloading his emails. Then came the moment Vance had been dreading. A shout came from his office. "Captain, you need to see this." Mitchell disappeared into the office. A moment later, he emerged holding a thick, leather-bound ledger and a heavy canvas bag. He walked over to Blackwood. "Jackpot," Mitchell said grimly. "We found the floor safe. Slater was right about the keys." Mitchell dumped the contents of the bag onto the desk in front of Blackwood. Bundles of cash, hundreds mostly spilled out. Rubber-banded stacks of dirty money. "We count roughly 50,000 here," Mitchell said. "And the ledger, it details payouts from local bars, strip clubs, even a few drug corners, dates, amounts, names." Blackwood picked up the ledger. He flipped through the pages, his face hardening with every entry. He wasn't just a bad cop, Blackwood said, his voice low. He was a crime lord with a badge. Blackwood stood up. He walked over to the holding cell, the ledger in his hand. He held it up so Vance could see it through the bars. Vance was pale, sweating profusely now. The bravado was gone. He looked like a cornered animal. That's not mine, Vance stammered. Someone planted it. It's a setup. A setup? Blackwood asked, raising an eyebrow. With your handwriting in your safe in your office? Blackwood stepped closer. Do you know what the penalty is for racketeering, Sergeant? Federal RICO charges plus assault on a police officer plus civil rights violations. Vance gripped the bars. Chief Blackwood, listen. We can work something out. I know things. I know people higher up. I can give you names. Big names. The mayor's office. Other precincts. Vance was desperate. He was ready to burn the whole city down to save his own skin. Blackwood smiled, but it was a cold, sad smile. I'm sure you do, Vance, and you're going to tell us all of them, but not to make a deal. You're going to tell us because it's the only thing that might keep you off death row. Blackwood turned to Mitchell. Read him his rights, Captain, and then book him. Full processing. Fingerprints, mugshot, DNA. I want him in the system. And then, Blackwood said, looking Vance dead in the eye, transport him to county jail. General population. Vance's knees gave out. He slid down the bars, collapsing onto the floor of the cell. No, Vance whispered. No, you can't. County. I put half the guys in there. They'll kill me. They'll kill me before morning. You should have thought about that, Blackwood said, turning his back on the sobbing man. When you decided to become a criminal. As the officers moved in to haul Vance out for processing, the front doors of the station opened again. This time it wasn't police. It was the press. Camera crews from every major network in Seattle, alerted by the massive police presence, were crowding the entrance. The lights from their cameras flooded the lobby. Get the cameras ready, Blackwood said to Ada Reed. The people of Seattle deserve to see exactly what we're cleaning up. Vance was hauled out of the cell, weeping, his uniform disheveled, his hands cuffed behind his back. As he was led past the cameras, the flashes popped like lightning. The invincible warlord of the 12th Precinct was broadcast live to the city, broken, crying, and in chains. It was the ultimate humiliation. But for Chief Quentin Blackwood, it wasn't about revenge. It was about sending a message. The message was simple. The game has changed. Months later, the rain in Seattle hadn't stopped, but the atmosphere inside the King County Courthouse was dry, hot, and suffocating. The trial of the people versus Vance Harlan had become the highest-profile police corruption case in Washington state history. The media called it the Blue Purge. Every day the courtroom was packed. In the front row, sitting with the quiet intensity of a stone statue, was Chief Quentin Blackwood. He attended every single hearing, his presence a silent reminder to the jury, the judge, and the defendant that this was personal. Vance Harlan sat at the defense table, but he was a shadow of the man who had terrorized the 12th Precinct. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting suit and a complexion that was gray and pasty from months in county lockup. He had lost weight. His mustache, once his trademark, had been shaved off, revealing a weak, trembling chin. The prosecution, led by ADA Nora Reed, had been merciless. They didn't just present the assault on Blackwood. That was merely the opening act. Officer Slater, now Detective Slater, took the stand and detailed the culture of fear he had cultivated. She spoke about the taxes he collected from local businesses. She spoke about the planted evidence. She spoke about the lost body cam footage. But the nail in the coffin wasn't Slater. It was Vance's own friends. Officers Kane and Brooks, facing accessory charges, had cut deals. They turned state's evidence faster than Vance could blink. They detailed the floor safe, the ledger, and the specific instances where Vance had bragged about breaking suspects. On the final day of the trial, Vance took the stand against his lawyer's advice. It was a disaster. He tried to charm the jury. He tried to play the tough cop in a tough world card. "I did what I had to do to keep this city safe," Vance shouted during cross-examination, his face turning that familiar, dangerous red. "You people sit in your safe houses while I wade through the garbage. I am a hero." Ada Reed didn't flinch. She simply played the security footage from the booking area, video that Vance thought he had deleted, but which Chief Blackwood's forensic team had recovered from a cloud backup server Vance didn't even know existed. The jury watched in high definition as Vance slammed Quentin Blackwood's face into the floor. They heard the sickening crunch. They heard Vance laugh. The jury deliberated quickly. When Judge Watkins read the verdict, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the HVAC system. On the charge of aggravated assault in the first degree, guilty. On the charge of civil rights violations, guilty. On the charge of racketeering and corruption, guilty. The list went on. 17 counts. 17 guilty verdicts. "Vance Harlan," Judge Watkins said, looking over his spectacles with disdain. "You have disgraced your uniform. You have betrayed the public trust, and you have shown absolutely no remorse." Vance stood up, his hands shaking. "Your Honor, I'm a cop. You can't put me in with them. I won't survive a week." "You are not a cop, Mr. Harlan," the judge replied coldly. "You are a convict." The sentence was hammered down like a thunderclap. 25 years to life, no possibility of parole for the first portion. Vance screamed as the bailiffs dragged him away. He looked back at the gallery, locking eyes with Chief Blackwood. He expected to see a gloating smile. Instead, Blackwood just looked disappointed. He looked at Vance like one would look at a broken tool that had to be discarded. The bus ride to the Monroe Correctional Complex was a journey through hell. Vance was shackled to a bench seat, surrounded by men who smelled of sweat and fear. He kept his head down, praying that his transfer paperwork had been processed correctly. He had been promised protective custody, the snitch wing. It was isolation, 23 hours a day in a cell. But it was safe. It was the only way a dirty cop survived prison. When the bus arrived at the processing center, Vance was stripped, searched, and given a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He waited in a holding cell for his unit assignment. A guard approached the bars. He was a big man chewing gum with a name tag that read, Higgins. "Harlan," Higgins said. "That's me," Vance said, rushing to the bars. "Look, I'm supposed to be in Unit B, protective custody. Check the file." Higgins looked at his clipboard. He frowned. Then he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "It says here there was a clerical error, Harlan. Unit B is full, overcrowded." Vance's heart stopped. "What? No, you can't do that. Call the warden. I'm a former police sergeant. You put me in Gen Pop, I'm a dead man." Higgins shrugged. "Warden is out today. Budget cuts. You know how it is. We got a bed for you in Unit D, though." "Unit D, general population. The jungle. Please," Vance begged, tears streaming down his face. "I can pay you. I have money stashed outside. I can bribe." Higgins laughed. "That's another write-up, Harlan. You're starting off on the wrong foot." Higgins unlocked the door. "Move." The walk to Unit D felt like a funeral procession. Every gate that clicked shut behind him was another seal on his tomb. When they reached the main block, the noise hit him first, a roar of shouting, banging, and laughter. Higgins shoved Vance through the gate and locked it behind him. "Good luck, Sarge." Vance stood on the tier, clutching his bedroll. The noise in the block died down. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. In prison, news travels faster than light. They knew who he was. They knew what he had done. A man stepped out of a cell on the ground floor. He was huge, covered in tattoos, with a scar running down the side of his face. Vance recognized him instantly. It was Dante, the Hammer Voss. Vance had arrested him years ago. He had planted a throwdown weapon on Dante to ensure a longer sentence. He had broken Dante's jaw during the interrogation just for looking at him wrong. Dante smiled. His teeth were metal. "Well, well," Dante boomed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Look what the rain washed in." Vance backed up, hitting the bars. "Dante, look, it was business, just business." Dante laughed, stepping closer. The other inmates formed a circle, cutting off any escape. The guards in the tower seemed to be looking the other way. "You took years of my life, Harlan," Dante said softly. "You broke my jaw. You laughed at my mother when she cried in the courtroom." "I can help you," Vance squealed. "I know the legal system. I can help with your appeals." "We don't need lawyers in here," Dante said, cracking his knuckles. "We have our own justice." Vance didn't scream when the first punch landed. He didn't have enough breath. The beatdown wasn't lethal. That would have been too easy. It was educational. It was a message. For what felt like forever, Vance Harlan, the tyrant of the 12th precinct, was reduced to a whimpering mess on the concrete floor, feeling every ounce of pain he had ever inflicted on others. When it was over, Dante knelt beside him. Vance was curled in a fetal position, bleeding from his nose and mouth, his eyes swollen shut. "Welcome home, officer," Dante whispered. "You belong to us now." For the rest of his days, Vance Harlan didn't die. He lived. He lived in a world where he was the bottom of the food chain. He scrubbed toilets with a toothbrush. He traded his food for safety. He aged rapidly, the stress eating him alive from the inside out. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered by the older inmates to the new arrivals. The karma wasn't that he died. It was that he had to live every single day as the thing he hated most, a victim. A year later, the 12th precinct was unrecognizable. The flickering lights were fixed. The leak in the ceiling was gone. The smell of stale coffee and fear had been replaced by the scent of fresh paint and productivity. Chief Quentin Blackwood walked through the front doors. He wasn't wearing a trench coat this time. He was in full dress uniform, the gold stars on his collar gleaming. "Morning, Chief," the desk sergeant called out. It was a young man, polite and alert. "Morning, Sergeant," Blackwood replied with a genuine smile. He walked back to the bullpen. At the center of the room, leading the briefing, was Sergeant Lena Slater. She had earned her stripes the hard way through good police work and integrity. When she saw Blackwood, she stopped the briefing. "Room, attention." Every officer stood up. There was no fear in their eyes, only respect. Blackwood waved them down. "As you were. I just came to check on the transition." Slater walked over, shaking his hand. "Crime stats are down 40% in the district, Chief. Community complaints are almost zero. People actually wave at us when we drive by now." Blackwood nodded, looking around the room. He looked at the spot where he had been assaulted a year ago. The floor was clean. The ghosts were gone. "You did good, Slater." "We did good, Chief," she corrected. Blackwood turned to leave, but stopped at the door. He looked back at the station, a place that was once a fortress of corruption, now a beacon of service. He touched the scar above his eyebrow. It had faded, but it would always be there. "Justice," Blackwood murmured to himself as he walked out into the Seattle rain, which finally, for the first time in a long time, felt like it was washing the city clean. The fall of Vance Harlan wasn't just a victory for Quentin Blackwood. It was a victory for the truth. It reminds us that authority without accountability is just tyranny waiting to happen. Vance thought his badge was a shield that would protect him from his own sins. But he learned the hard way that in the end, character is the only currency that matters. He spent the rest of his days behind the very bars he used to rattle, served a cold dish of karma by the very people he wronged. It's a stark reminder. Treat people with dignity, not because of who they are, but because of who you are. Because you never know when the stranger in the rain might hold the keys to your destruction. If this story of justice and karma kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs to see the bad guy get what he deserves. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next deep dive into true stories of justice served cold. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.